In the last episode, we had an overview of the history of guitar distortion and fuzz guitar from the origins in the early 1950s to the planetary success of I Can Get No Satisfaction by the Rolling Stones in the mid-60s. We're about to continue this travel through time to follow the evolution of the fuzz rock from a technical, historical and musical point of view. If you missed the last episode, BTR number 29, I warmly suggest to check it out. So to start from the beginning, we are now looking at the evolution of fuzz tone pedals through the 1960s. Everyone would agree that I Can Get No Satisfaction became the soundtrack of summer 1965. When the relentless, catchy riff began to play on the radio, some people thought it was a growling saxophone playing. The single soon climbed the charts to the top position, both in the US and in the UK. Guitar players wondered how they could get that sound. The answer was a Maestro FZ-1 at their feet. Within the end of the year, Gibson distributors sold all the storage of fuzz tone pedals that had remained stuck on the shelves for near 3 years and sold 3,500 more units, just out of factory. In the UK, it was not so easy to get a hold of the American-made Maestro fuzz tone pedal. Many musicians, technicians and electronics enthusiasts got to work to develop self-sufficient alternatives. For example, at the time of Satisfaction, Tony T.S. McPhee, guitar player of the Groundhogs, was working as an engineer at the National Telephone Company. He told me that he modified his Vox AC30 by adapting one half of an ECC83 valve in the preamp to overdrive the next one. The Vox technician Gary Hurst from London intercepted this demand from the British market and developed a new fuzz pedal after Glenn Snoddy's Maestro FZ-1. Gary Hurst brought improvements to the circuit for incremented power and sustain. He also added shielded wiring and, surprisingly, even a true bypass switch. The British Fuzzbox would be soon marketed under the new Solasound Limited brand with the name of Tonebender Mark I. Gary Hurst used to supply Jeff Beck with his fuzz pedals on a regular basis. Beck used the Tonebender Mark I in 1965 for the recording sessions of the album Having a Rev Up with the Yardbirds. Songs like Heartful of Soul or the raking version of the blues standard I'm a Man left an indelible mark on a whole generation of musicians.
I love her no more if you wanna know. I love you so, I don't wanna let you go. I'm so alone, I'm gonna make you see so alone. If I could really love being so alone, be your turn to laugh so alone. You wish you never realized, you go hate your mind. Ain't gonna find in the moment time.
Within the end of 1965, Pete Townsend of The Who also ventured with a Tonebender, and Paul McCartney used it for his bass track of Think For Yourself on the Beatles album Rubber Soul. The same circuit of the Tonebender Mark I was also used in another historic British fuzz pedal, the rare Zonk machine, produced in Leeds by John Hornby's Hughes. In 1966, Mosrite of California came with their Fuzz-rite, designed by the electronics technician Eddie Sanner. Sanner took as well inspiration from the Maestro FZ-1, but tried to make Snoddy's circuit more reliable at low temperatures. The acid and sharp Fuzz-rite is one of the most representative pedals of the 60s wild fuzz sound. Produced and directed in 1966 by B-movie master Roger Corman, The Wild Angels, forerunner of Easy Rider, opens with a storm of Fuzz-rite, an instrumental track by Davy Allen and the Arrows. Allen was awarded the title of King of Fuzz Guitar, probably by some close friends. Joking apart, the combination of music and visual of the sequence is really stunning. The Fuzz Guitar becomes the soundtrack of the countercultural imagery of the 60s. In American teenagers of the time, breaks the urge of forming a band, get themselves locked into a garage and play wild and outrageous rock and roll. They take inspiration from Yardbirds, Them and Rolling Stones, but try to sound more raw and aggressive than the British bands. The extraordinary season of the 60s American psychedelic and garage punk rock begins. It's an invasion of bands that take the Fuzz Guitar as a trademark or distinctive character of their sound. Lenny Kaye, who would later become the lead guitar player of the Patti Smith group, documented this particle music scene of the mid to late 1960s, assembling in the early 70s the double compilation album Nuggets on Elektra Records. The album would be credited as a milestone in the rock and roll history. If you say Fuzz Guitar, this is what comes to my mind. It's the intro of Psychotic Reaction by the Count 5. Other notable bands of that scene are the seeds of the album A Web of Sound, the litter of distortions, the Electric Prunes, the Blues Magoos, the Standals, the Texans Moving Sidewalks with Billy Gibbons, the Nas with Todd Rundgren, and the Amboy Dukes with Ted Nugent. It's no wonder that at this point, a lot of manufacturers want a fuzzbox pedal in their catalog. Gibson improved the Maestro Fuzz tone and produced over 40,000 units of a new version labeled FZ-1A. In London, Watkins produced the Pep Box, named after its designer, the Italian Pepper Rush, and used by the Beatles. Selmer produced the Bass tone used by Syd Barrett in the early Pink Floyd. Baldwin Burns introduced the buzz around, used and praised in the 70s by Robert Fripp of the King Crimson. Sola Sound came with new versions of the tone bender, the Mark 1.5, which had a simpler circuit with only 2 transistors. The Mark II Professional developed a few months later, and the Mark III. Sola Sound also made the tone bender, in its various versions of the circuit, for third-party companies, most notably by Vox, but also Hasbro, Roto Sound and Marshall, which renamed it Super Fuzz. The Fuzz Sound was a version of the Super Fuzz rebranded by Park, trademark name which at the time was hiding some of the best Jim Marshall's products. Dick Denny, legendary electronic designer at Vox Jennings, adopted the circuit of the Mark 1.5 in a tiny enclosure to be plugged directly into the guitar. It was marked V816 distortion booster. Ivor Arbiter founded Arbiter Electronics Limited, later acquired by Dallas Music. Arbiter developed a slight variant of the circuit of the Tone Bender Mark 1.5 and Vox distortion booster. Allegedly watching a round mix and bass, Ivor Arbiter had the idea of housing the circuit in a unique round enclosure. In a round shape, knobs and foot switch seemed to form a stylized face, which inspired the name of Fuzz-face. Naivety and simplicity of the pioneering era of Fuzz Guitar came abruptly to an end in November 1966. When a young black man from Seattle arrived in London and stepped on the foot switch of a Fuzz-face, nothing in the guitar world would ever be the same. The point of Jimi Hendrix is not only in the intrinsic value of his fiery performances. Hendrix should also be credited with carrying the electric guitar across an early stage to a whole new level of mature tone consciousness. The fuzz was no longer to be intended as a gimmick attached to the instrument, but it became the instrument itself. Hendrix developed a unique talent to interact with his Fuzz-face. He could control and play it, preserving the dynamics of his inimitable touch. With the invaluable help of his guitar tech Roger Mayer, Hendrix discovered that the sound of fuzz is very mutable and depends on the other pieces of the gear. With Jimi's powerful Marshall amps, the fuzz finally sounded more organic. It didn't cover in an intrusive way the source guitar's tone, but rather sounded naturally integrated, responsive to the strength of the attack or the setting of guitar's volume control. Hendrix conceived the electric guitar in a revolutionary way, as an integral part of a system including effects, amplifier and recording techniques. All components are finally granted the same importance, so to become a new, more complex instrument. Later, Jimi added in his arsenal another fuzz pedal, the Octavia, built for him by Roger Mayer. The Octavia has a three-dimensional effect, adding overtones of different octaves to the distortion, especially when playing on the higher frets. One of the earliest disciples of Hendrix is Leigh Stevens, guitar player of the Californian power trio Blue Chair. Armed with a Fuzz-face, Stevens recorded in 1968 the devastating debut album Vincebus Eruptum, and after a few months its brilliant follow-up Outside Inside. The first album contained a fuzzy, distorted cover of Summertime Blues and became a hit single. Defined the loudest rock band of the time, they paved the way of the hard rock of the 70s. Other notable Fuzz-face devote was David Gilmour, who used it from his first album with Pink Floyd, Saucerful of Secrets, all through the 1970s. The market of fuzz boxes was still in rapid and full expansion. Many pedals presented substantial analogies in the circuit, and in some cases they were absolutely identical. The Astrotone, produced in New York, was one of the first American fuzzes to include a tone control. It was also sold in a version rebranded by the seller Sam Ash.
Both guitars got the fuzz tone on, drummer standing upright, pounding along. A howl, a tone, a feedback whine, biker boys meet the college kind. How in the world are they making that sound? Velvet Underground.
Both guitars got the fuzz tone on. That's how Jonathan Richman describes the Velvet Underground in a song he dedicated to the legendary band from New York City. The Velvet Underground finally dignified the rock and roll as a legitimate form of art with the blessing of Andy Warhol. Their debut album, released in 1967, has had and still has a huge influence on an entire generation of musicians. Known as the Banana Album, it's generally considered one of the most important works in the rock history. With their following album, Wet Light Wet Heat, released in 1968, the Velvets went even a step farther and created a more aggressive, massively distorted sound. The next episode is the third and last part of this time travel following the history of Fuzz Guitar through music and culture. Please make sure you subscribe to the BTR channel and click the bell to keep posted. Thank you for helping our community of guitar friends growing. Feedback, support, and each of your comments help the BTR channel to keep going. Please feel free to join our Facebook group and visit us on Instagram.